Hi, my name is Tiana Davis, and I am the Community Development Assistant for the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. Our office investigates complaints of civil rights discrimination, combats human trafficking, ensures equitable language access to county government resources, and works to build community across diverse peoples. With me this evening is my co-host, Kyla Hannington, the Public Outreach and Engagement Division Manager with the Office of Human Rights. We are so excited to welcome you all to this discussion brought to you in partnership with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, with author Jiaming Tang about his debut novel, Cinema Love, a staggering, tender epic about gay men in rural China and the women who marry them. Jiaming is a queer immigrant writer. He holds an MFA from the University of Alabama, and his writing has appeared in such publications as AGNI, LitHub, Joyland Magazine, and elsewhere. He is a 2022 to 2023 Center for Fiction Emerging Writer Fellow and lives in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Jiaming.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction, Tiana, and thank you so much for having me, Tiana and Kyla. I'm so honored to be here.
We are also excited to have you with us. We loved this book, and we'll gush about that later.
Yeah.
For those watching who haven't had the chance to read it yet, could you take a few minutes and introduce the work to them?
Sure. So the book is Cinema Love, and I would describe it as a novel about gay men in rural China and the women who marry them, and also the secret theater where their husbands cruise for love. Much of the book, the first half of the book, really centers itself around this theater, this movie theater that becomes a community space for a group of gay men in rural China. And the second half of the book follows the wives of those men who are trying to establish a life in America after they leave China. And I thought I would read just the first paragraph of the book to open this off. There's no real context needed, but it's just a scene that opens in the cinema that is the titular setting for the book. And I'll start now. There he is, hiding in the basement and waiting for love. Upstairs is a cinema. The movies on rotation are old, and to outsiders, it's a wonder there's any business at all. They joke about the place over cheap beer. Money laundering is a popular theory. So is human trafficking, except the people who frequent the theater are small, nervous men. The only woman anyone has seen there is the box office clerk. You know, the stern one who limps. She's here now, shuffling from hallway to box office with a dustpan and a broom. A customer waits outside, his hat pulled low. The exchange is wordless. The woman's eyes lick like a tongue while the customer gestures with his finger. One ticket, I don't care for what, before a larger than normal bill moves from hand to outstretched hand. Woman and customer exchange nods, and the latter enters with the gait of a bandit. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this book, so as Tiana said, we love the book. So there will be much gushing going on. I'll start. I'll just start the gushing. I thought it was just staggeringly beautiful. It was so wonderfully written and sort of luminous. I don't even really know all the descriptors that I would like to use to describe it. So congratulations on really like a stunning debut. So it was just released. And I will tell you, so for people watching at home, I forgot this book downstairs. I'm upstairs in my house. And literally 90 seconds before we went live, I went sprinting down my stairs, grabbed the book, and came sprinting up the stairs. And I was doing that with my daughter, who's home from university. She's 21. She saw me grab the book and she said, I heard that book is so good. And I was like, where? And she's like, on the internet. I heard the internet's talking about it. The book has been out like a week, right? Like, isn't it very new? So tell us about how it's going. Like, what are you hearing and how does it feel for you?
Oh my gosh, I actually try to tune out audience response to it because like I feel like it's not for me to look at. But it's been kind of surreal because it's when I started writing the book, I never thought anyone would see it.
Mm,
And I wrote the book with the belief that it was going to be a project for myself, and it was going to be a project where I could explore um, what it meant, what it would have looked like if I never left China, and what it would have looked like to be a person in a community where queer love doesn't exist,
mhm,
culturally or socially. Um, and it's just been wonderful. Like going to events is it's so energizing, and but it's also really strange because we sort of talked about this earlier because I wrote the book 3 to 4 years ago, and now I'm just starting to talk about it. And so, where I am at now as a writer and as a reader is kind of different from where I was when I started writing the book. And
mhm.
so, trying to find a meeting place between the version of myself that wrote this book and the version of myself that's here today is very unusual.
Mhm, mhm. That I mean, I love that description. I mean, we actually have a there's something I'm going to probably jump ahead in our we had some questions prepared, and you've just touched on something, which was this that you said just now that you wrote this as a for yourself and sort of imagining a world
Yeah,
in which queer love is not acceptable, right?
right,
Is that
right.
and so I had this moment when I was reading the book and I made a note, so I'm gonna read it because I want to make
Hmm.
sure I get it right. But I had this experience when I was about halfway through reading it, where I thought, if anyone felt that queer love should be forbidden,
Hmm.
read this book, and I was only about halfway through at that point. I thought they would change their mind, like because what I felt, and again, even just at the halfway point, let alone all the way through, was I was so struck by the men were finding love anyway, right? So like
Hmm.
nothing, like they were finding companionship. They were finding ways to connect with each other, but the forbidden element and the hidden element and the shame element impacted everyone. So the
Hmm.
men were lonely and hurting, and the women equally so. Like you could just see
Hmm.
how all the fabric of humanity was damaged by this limitation on people being able
Hmm.
to love one another. And so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm really glad you mentioned it. Can we
Yeah.
talk more about that?
Yeah, I think to start, I want to talk about sort of the inspiration point for the book, which was a moment when I was a teenager. This was before I was ever a writer, and before really I was a serious reader. But I was around 16 or 17, and I was visiting family in China, and I was at a bus stop with my mom and her friend, who is a male, and he is married to a woman, and he is the father of multiple kids. And but the context here is that all throughout my life, um, there would be rumors that he was gay or that he was dating women, um, either with or without his wife's knowledge. And I always thought it was just hearsay because he had a more feminine affect. But when we were at the bus stop, I saw my mother's friend touch another man's arm in a way that was so tender. And like a touch on the arm is so innocuous. It's not like a pat on the butt, but there was such a look of desire in his eyes and such a look of fear. And it was just like an image that stuck with me. And I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what to do with it. So I think it became like an obsession. It became something that I couldn't stop thinking about. Like, like what if I was him? Like afraid to show the tenderest parts of myself, which was my love for another man. But also like, what does it mean to be somebody who lives in a place and loves that place, but that place doesn't love you back? Um, and that was really the starting point of the book. But the truly mysterious person that I started thinking about later, as I was writing about this man who became the character Old Second, was who was his wife? Who was this woman who supported him, who loved him, who maybe knew or didn't know that he was gay. And what did that love look like between them? Because there had to have been some kind of love, maybe not romantic love, but there had to be some kind of love. And so the book took a shift towards being about the woman. It took a shift towards being about the woman who loved gay men, who were arranged to marry them, but who had ambitions of their own, who were joyous, who were sometimes hateful, who were jealous and lonely. And it's really and part of it has to do also with like my mother's own journey with accepting her gay son. And so like there's just all this different kinds of love in the book. There's romantic love obviously at the forefront, but there's also the love of of like friendship. And yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I'm actually going to jump ahead again because you mentioned your mom and her journey.
Mm-hmm.
I read your Jezebel article
Oh
that
my
you put
God.
out recently.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you talk about you guys rebuilding your relationship
Yeah.
while she works on your nails. And a similar, spoiler alert, a similar thing happens with the two female characters in the
Mm-hmm.
book. Did your sessions with your mom, that experience, did that inspire this scene?
Yeah, it was a direct inspiration. And for some context, there are two kind of main women characters in the novel. One of them is Bao Mei, and one of them is Yan Hua, and they're both married to gay men separately. But they each have different experiences and responses to their relationships. Yan Hua is more negative, and Bao Mei's is more positive. And I think that scene that you're talking about, it's specifically derived from when I was 16 or 17, and I told my mom I was gay, and she was like, "No, you're not. There's no such thing. You're just, you don't know who you are yet." But a month later, she started going to beauty school, and she needed somebody to practice on, like in terms of her nail art. And I thought it was so ironic that she rejected me initially and yet wanted to do this, stereotypically feminine activity with me. But there was also the proximity and the closeness that allowed us to be able to talk to each other while she was painting my nails. She was able to develop a better understanding of me as a person, not just as a gay person, but as somebody who um, wanted to be a writer. And I was able to understand her as not just my mom, but like as a woman, as an artist, as somebody who had ambitions beyond the family. And the similar scene happens in the book where these two women who are connected by the theater and connected by this community of gay men who believe that they would hate each other, they're connected by this intimate act of, um, of painting their nails.
So I want to go back to the beginning because
Yeah.
this cover, I love this cover. I, we we were researching another book, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was on a book website, and I came across this one. They were promoting this like, "Hey, pre-order now,"
Mm-hmm.
in celebration of Pride Month. And this cover stopped me in my tracks. I was immediately obsessed. I sent it to Kyla. I was like, let's do this one. Like, I want to do this one. What was your reaction to seeing this cover for the first time? And the UK one, because that one is also beautiful.
Oh my gosh, I actually have the UK one on my table right now, so I can show people the UK cover in addition to the US cover. This is the UK cover. It's two hands. It's two hands holding. I'm going to talk about the UK one first because the inspiration is more direct. It's a direct inspiration from that story of the man trying to touch the other man's arm at the bus stop. And so, like in those terms, it felt very moving to see that moment again actualized as a piece of art. But with the US cover, I was so happy because I used to work in publishing, and sometimes authors aren't always happy with their covers, and they just kind of settle for what's best. They don't want to push back. And I was really happy that my team and my art director, they were able to find something that was so tender, that was so kind of sexy, but also very tasteful. Um, and I don't know, I was just extremely happy. Yeah.
It is an absolutely gorgeous cover. I mean, and I think that's true. Like, I know other authors, and you sometimes
Yeah.
win in the cover department, and sometimes not so much. So I love that this one is so perfect for the book, and that you're happy with it
Yeah.
too. It's it really is an amazing piece, the whole thing. You mentioned some of the names of the book, and I was so struck again by you mentioned Old Second. I love the names in the book. And so there's Old Second, Aldous, Spring Chicken, and Kevin. And there's just wonderful naming conventions throughout. Can you talk to us about the names?
Yeah, I think part of it is just like I don't know that this is all of China, but like I come from, I think it's actually more of like a rural thing. I come from a very rural part of China called Min'an, and it is very close to where the book is set, which is Maui City and Fuzhou. But it was the kind of small village where everybody got a nickname, and it was usually a nickname that was given to you based on a physical trait or based on something funny that you did as a child. Like my father's nickname was Stupid Chun because he flunked the second grade.
I'm not sure that's like the nicest nickname I've ever heard.
Yeah, but a lot of them are actually quite mean. Like Spring Chicken is probably not the nicest thing to call somebody. There's another character named Ugly Mulan in the book. But like I just wanted to honor the verbal dexterity of these people who didn't necessarily have a chance to go to school, and I wanted to I don't know, I wanted to bring to the foreground their inventiveness of language, and the ways in which they even naming a child could become a game. And so that was the main inspiration. Kevin is just Kevin because he's in America.
But I did enjoy making that list though. Like, that is the thing. Like, there was playfulness in those names, right? And what you talk about, you use the term verbal dexterity, and to see the kind of a sharp eye with which people were given their nicknames. But I think for you to choose it as the name of the people, because that was a choice, right? Because we could have had their given name and then their nickname, but like the choice to have us know some of these characters the whole way through by these nicknames, I thought was very rich.
Yeah, well, I think it's also very true to my experience as like a young person in a Chinese immigrant family, because I don't know the names of a lot of my relatives, because like the naming convention is typically you just call her a big aunt, or like or if she has like a strange name like Crazy Ding, but I don't actually know their names. I don't know my grandmother's name actually. Now that I think about it, but yeah, it's just true to my experience as a person.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that because I have some cousins. I didn't know their names until I was an adult because they always went by their nicknames. But can you give us the proper pronunciations for some of the characters in the book, particularly the main four, and then there's Bao Mei's brother, and
Yeah. So there is the main four characters are Old Second, and there is Bao Mei, who is married to Old Second for convenience. There's Yan Hua, who is a woman who is married to the man that Old Second is having a relationship with in the movie theater, and that man's name is Shun Er. And I truly cannot remember Yan Hua's Bao Mei's brother's name. Like it's Hen Bao. It's Hen Bao. Yeah.
So I think you've touched on this, but I did want to talk. I mean, so forgive me for asking you to come back to it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I was struck by as I was reading it was how I keep using the same adjectives, I'm so sorry, but how richly drawn
Yeah.
the characters were. And to explain what I mean by that is that, and I think you said it, that they could be angry and they could be kind and they could be jealous, like this full range of humanity that you gave the characters. And that really struck me because I think it would have been easy to villainize some of them. And the compassion that I felt as a reader for people, for all of the characters, I don't know, it really impacted me. And one of the characters, and I don't really want to say too much because I don't want to do any spoilers, but I will say I found one of the characters less easy to love than some of the other ones. And so I finished the book a couple of days before Tiana. So when Tiana finished it, I was waiting because I really wanted to talk about it. And so we got to the end, and again, I sort of feel like I'm talking in code, but I just don't want to spoil anything for anybody.
Yeah.
But I said I felt like maybe did this particular character have a redemption arc, and sort of coming to this conclusion that they maybe did, but it was a very soft. The arc was like maybe more like a line. But I wanted to know, like, what do you feel? How do you feel about the trajectory of your characters?
Yeah, I think I know which character you're talking about, and so I will also talk about her in code because I'm going to talk to her. Not talk to her. I'm going to speak on her because that character was based on my mother, and that character was based on this woman who initially, who grew up in a small conservative village in China, where homosexuality was not just taboo but impossible, and her inability at first to accept that she had a gay son, and her journey through her art and through her work to understand who that gay son, which is me. Spoiler alert. Like the book is not autobiographical by any means. I don't think there's not a main character in the book who's a mother. But this character in particular, I think part of it is that like I wanted to write her in a way where it's very clear that she is homophobic, and it's very clear that she has a hard time understanding and accepting the community that her husband belonged to, and yet, and I actually agree with you, Kyla. I don't know that she redeems herself by the end. I don't think she understands the fact that she has become a kind of activist for gay people by accident by the end of the book. But I think that also mirrors my mother's journey. I think that she still, on some days, doesn't understand how to navigate having a gay son. But in her daily life, she does so many things that are, to me, miraculous as a gay person. Like she refuses to call my partner anything but my friend. But she knows that we're together, and she makes every single effort to make sure my partner is involved. She buys, a birthday cake for my partner. On Chinese New Year, she gives my partner a red envelope, which is, her way of saying you are also my child. But she cannot use the word gay. And so like it's a redemption arc, but it's static. There's a certain boundary that this character cannot cross. And I think that is true of some of the people in my community. I think realistically speaking, a lot of the people in my family are okay with the fact that I'm gay, but they are also, because of the way they were brought up, unable to say that word. And so that is where I come from in terms of writing this. I don't even know if I can call it a redemption arc, but this arc for this character and for these other characters.
Oh, thank you. It's it really, as I said already, and I'm repeating myself, but I was so struck. I mean, we read a lot. I read a lot. I like to read for fun, but we read a lot in our jobs too, with connecting with and trying to find books that have social justice themes and bring them and get. So we're so lucky, right? We're so lucky we get to do this too,
Yeah.
and to have characters of such beautiful complexity. Like I have to say, I don't see that all the time. And I read wonderful books, but not every wonderful book has beautifully complex characters. And so, like, was that difficult for you to really draw out like their full humanity? Like, can you take us through a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do actually with I think I was trying to push back against a certain depiction of immigrants in American media, particularly immigrant women, and it's that they're usually noble and they're usually quiet and they kind of take the brunt of a lot of violence and also the struggles of assimilation. But my lived experiences as an immigrant is that a lot of these people were extremely funny and were extremely kind of loud and ambitious, and they were kind of rude. They could be mean. They could say things that were out of pocket. And so I think that a lot of it for me was at first trying to figure out ways to write these characters into existence in the way that I knew them. And I think and I think to give a specific example of like I'm going to talk about Yan Hua for a second. I'm going to talk about her because she is to me, in many ways, she's the most complex character in the book, and she's the character who thinks she understands herself the most, but I suspect that she doesn't. I don't think I understand her either. I think she's kind of a mystery to me. But the process of writing her was extremely difficult because it was very easy to have her it was easy in the beginning to have her be depicted as a victim because of what happened to her and the fact that her husband was gay and that she struggled with that. It was very easy to depict her as a victim because she grew up in a very poor part of China in which it was not easy to be a girl or a woman. But once you strip those parts away, I had to think to myself, okay, but what is she? Like, who is she really? What does she like? And a lot of that came from conversations with my parents. At a certain point in the writing process, I became really greedy for mundane details. Like I would call them and like force them to tell me, like not facts, not data, not dates, but I would ask my mom, for example, like, okay, the night before you came to America, what did you feel? What did you feel on the plane? When I was with you on the plane as you were coming to America, and you maybe knew or didn't know that it would take many, many years before you could see home again and your parents who are very old. What was that like? I don't want dates. I don't want facts, but I want you to tell me how it felt. And that became the primary, those conversations became the primary texture of these characters. These kind of subterranean feelings of immigrants from my family who felt a lot but never had a chance to speak about it.
Well, I'm going to imagine, but let me ask instead of saying what I think. To tell us about how those conversations, with your parents, which I'm guessing were, inspired by because you're working on the book, and how did that change or impact the trajectory of your relationship with your parents?
I don't know, like it changed it really positively. Like I think I say this very often. I'm so lucky that I was able to be my parents' friend. Like it wasn't just like the fact that we love each other because they're my parents and I'm their son, but we genuinely enjoy each other and have fun talking about the things that they or I experienced as immigrants, and I consider that very lucky. And this happened when I was in Alabama in graduate school, and it was during the pandemic, and I couldn't go home. And so it was the only way that we could communicate with each other, was these long, to them very boring and painful conversations, asking them. And I would also ask them the same question over and over, because they would give me different answers to the same question, because they would refuse to tell me things. Like, they have that kind of rural mindset where it's like, why are you curious about things that are painful? Like, why, like, what's the point of knowing these things? Why not talk about something joyous or something that's funny? But I don't know, I just feel very lucky to be able to talk about these things with them.
Okay. Can you describe what, if any, role spirituality played in the story? Because there is a character, or a character's presence, rather, who sort of follows around and is kind of a protector for the cinema, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I want to. I grew up. My family is folk Buddhist, and a big part of that kind of cultural landscape is ancestral worship. And I think that the way Americans conceive of ghosts and the way other cultures conceive of ghosts is a little bit different. Like, growing up, when I think of like an American ghost and its depiction in media, it's usually like a ghost hunting show. And it's like, well, what are the facts? Is it real or is it not? Whereas like in my family, um, it's more so the fact that these are people who've passed, but their presence lingers, and there's no empirical evidence that they're there, but we're still going to on the family altar, we're still going to put oranges there so they can eat it in the afterlife. We're still going to put like some rice and some chicken there so that they can share in this meal with us on holidays. And that's really sort of the context in which I wrote about this ghost character, Hen Bao. He's not really. I don't. He doesn't really. It's arguable whether or not he really exists. But to these characters culturally, he is there, because that is, to my parents, I believe, their parents are still here, even though they're physically not.
Yeah. So you were just talking about how talking to your parents was a part of your process for this.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about your process? Like, other than that, what were some other things you did to get this book finished?
Yeah. A big part of this book, besides the cinema and these stories of gay people and their wives, a big part of the book is Chinatown in New York City, because I didn't necessarily grow up there, but it was a part of the world that my family orbited, and that I always saw as a kind of home that these immigrants built when they couldn't go home anymore. And I always thought that the version of Chinatown that I grew up with would never go away, and that it would always be there. But then the pandemic happened, and it disproportionately affected Chinese communities across America. And a lot of places that I believe are cultural institutions began to go away. And so I started to take walks on Google Maps, because I couldn't go home. I was in Alabama. I was under lockdown. And so I would go on Google Maps, and I would go to these neighborhoods that I cherish so deeply. Um, and I would just look at them again. And also, this is another thing that's good for other writers or people who are nostalgic. You can actually toggle the date on Google Maps so that you can go to a place in 2018 or 2013. It depends on where you are. Like, if you're in a place that is more rural, I think that option may not exist. But in like a big city, you can see, like for example, Chinatown. You could see parts of it as it was on Street View in 2013, and maybe even like 2010. And that became a part of my world building process. And the other thing that I did was, I don't know, like I started reading a lot of books about just queerness. not just queerness in like a Chinese context, but like queer sub communities. Like I love Samuel R. Delaney, who's like a sci-fi writer. But he has this wonderful book called Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, and it is about these theaters in Times Square that would play adult films. And the first half of the book was this very careful and very tender and very loving depiction of the people who went to that theater. And so that became a big point of inspiration for the book too.
Yeah, I just put a link in the chat. There's been sort of, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, hopefully you're seeing our links go into the chat. There's the Jezebel article that was mentioned. There's a link to NYU Press, Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, and of course to Jiaming's website. And so please make sure you check what you're viewing and follow some of these links. And actually, on that note, while I'm talking to viewers, please, if you have questions, type them in the chat too. We'd love to share them. You talked about like this book is, and I think we've started touching on that, like the immigration story.
Yeah.
And there's, and I wish I had grabbed quotes. I didn't, so forgive me for paraphrasing now. But there's parts people are talking about, and you talked about this with your parents, like being isolated for so long and not seeing their family and sending letters home, and in some cases in the book, the letters that they're sending home are not actually getting home, as we know. But I was also thinking about one of the characters talking about how much they it was so much worse than they thought, and at least back home they knew what to expect, and they'd be around their family, and I thought it was very realistic that it's not everything is amazing, and you might hope and believe. I mean, you're moving because you believe in a dream, and what happens when you're not experiencing that dream. So can we talk a little bit more about like the experience that some of the characters are having once they get to the States and over the years in the States?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is that I think that there's this kind of rhetoric wherein or when you arrive in America, and like this conversation is still ongoing within like my family members in China, and it's like, because it's that part of China that I'm from, it's really poor, and a lot of the people in my family, it's changing now, but like when my parents were like in their 20s, they didn't have access to jobs that weren't like like working in a factory or like doing construction, and so like the rhetoric is always that like, okay, go to America, it doesn't matter how you get there, even if you go there illegally, and even if you are jailed, you will get asylum eventually, which doesn't always happen. And your life will be better, and you will thank yourself, and your kids will thank you for coming there. But I know so many people in my family who came here, and they're just so miserable because you're away. You don't have the language. You don't you the basic building blocks of English are just completely different from the building blocks of Chinese. And there's no way to get around. You're working a job, typically in a restaurant or a nail salon, with hours that are just as grueling as anything that you work back home. The money is much better because of the exchange rate, but it's just I just remembered that I'm not gonna reveal who this person is because I want to protect their identity. But there was a person in my community that I know who came here, and I don't know what happened, but there was like a week where she was bedridden, not because she was physically ill or anything like that, but because she was so incredibly homesick. She was so like she it's hard for me to talk about because like I don't have that experience. I grew up here, but it's unfathomable the fact that my father came here in the 1980s, and when he was around my age, and he came here knowing that the next time he saw his parents would be at their funerals. Like that is the belief. I don't know if he believed that, but that is the reality of the situation, because going back to China takes so much money that it's not financially worth it to these immigrants. Um, and I think that, yeah, like I'm still trying to wrap my mind around those feelings. I don't know that I've processed them yet. I think I just see the pain sometimes that is unspoken about.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hmm.
It's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to think about in the book. I thought the book, this is one of the things I loved about it, is it was so real. As I said, thinking about what happens when we live in a society where, we
Hmm.
can't be our full selves, and how that impacts the whole society, or the,
Yeah.
what the characters experienced, once they got to the United States, and what you're describing. And it's so real and so impactful for the world that we're living in, and the country that we're living in right now. It's
Yeah.
very, very good, and deep. It's deep.
Thank
Tiana,
you.
do you want me to, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm gonna shift the topic a little bit. So you're a Chinese author, and this book
Hmm.
was released early May of this year, which
Hmm.
is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Was that release date on purpose, or was it just like a happy coincidence?
Oh my gosh. So authors typically don't decide the release dates, but I assume that it was intentional to release the book um on in May, because right after May is is Pride Month. So like it's like a nice little 1-2 punch of my identities. Yeah. I assume, I don't know, but I assume. It makes sense.
I was very lucky last year. I got to read and talk interview the Jeffrey Dale Lofton about his debut novel, Red Clay Susie, which, by the way, everybody, amazing, amazing, wonderful book. But one of the things that we talked about was who he wanted to read the book. Like who
Yeah.
was he kind of hoping the book would Hans would find the book. And so let me ask that to you. Is there somebody out there that you're hoping will find this book?
This is such a hard question to answer, because I think that okay, so two things. When I write, I don't typically think of an audience because it paralyzes me, um, and I don't want to think about somebody getting the book and being like, "This is not my experience," and then like putting it down, you know. But also, like, I ideally I would love for somebody who either grew up in or knows about the people that I'm writing about, or who knows about the places that I'm writing about, to
Mhm.
read the book and not say something like, "Oh yeah, isn't that the truth?" But like, "Oh, I see, I recognize it. I recognize a part of it that is familiar." Because a lot of these places, I think one of the most moving experiences for me as a reader is reading about places that are no longer there, but reading them or experience or watching them be written about or described in ways that are full of love. There's a movie that was deeply inspirational for me, and that movie is called Goodbye Dragon Inn by Simon Land. It's a Taiwanese sort of art film about a movie theater on its last day of screening, and there are shots in the movie um, of, like, for example, of the hallway and the ticket taker walking down the hallway, and it's just like a shot of that happening. No other drama for like 2 minutes, and there's like a shot of um, the screening room at the end as the people are leaving it um, after the movie. Um, and I just remember watching it and being like, wow, like how much love do you have? How much love did this person have for this place that they're willing to film it for 3 to 4 minutes? Not a documentary; it's like a fictional film. Um, but I think ideally that when I write about the East Broadway Mall, which is a place that did exist and that was vibrant, and it's still standing, but it's kind of a ghost of itself. I would I would love if somebody saw those descriptions and being like, wow, like he really loved that place, because I do.
I think that comes across for sure.
Yeah.
It definitely does. I really don't know how to verbalize what it is that I'm thinking here, but the way that you wrote the characters and how they interact with each other, Bao Mei in particular, you can truly feel the love and the familiarity. I've never been to China in my life, but I was reading and I was like, okay, I can see this. I can envision that. You know, I can feel what this theater meant to, or the cinema meant to the men who cruised, right? But also Bao Mei, and why she felt like she needed to protect, you know, the theater, its patrons. No real question there. I just wanted to say that. But talking about movies, do you have a fan cast for this? Were it to be picked up?
Oh my gosh. Not really, because like, okay, like here's what I think. I think realistically speaking, any celebrity that I know of would be too attractive. Because in my head, these characters, because of where they're from, they're not super attractive. So like I love Tony Leung, you know, I love Michelle Yeoh, you know, but they're kind of too like, I don't know, they seem very elegant and poised and beautiful. Whereas these characters in my head, I don't think they're ugly, but they're kind of rough around the edges. And I don't know, like if somebody knows like a really talented Chinese actor who is kind of rough around the edges, I would love to know. Yeah.
Yeah. I did notice that you mentioned, or you described a few of the characters as ugly in the book. What does that, does it literally mean that they're ugly, or is there just something uh, interesting about the way that they look? Because they were still drawn to each other, right?
Yeah, I think in some cases they were just physically unattractive. And like I'm not trying to be like glib or like funny or mean about this, but like I feel like that's just how people in my family just talk. Like this person's ugly, but then like that person would still be in the room and they would take it, but they would not be offended. And so it's just a physical descriptor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question because I noticed that too, and I wanted to ask you that. So, I mean, we talked backstage, and you alluded to it here. You know, that this book was written a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and you are maybe moving in new ways, and so we wanted to
Yeah.
talk about like what's going on for you now. Is there something in the works?
I am working on something, but I'm very superstitious
Okay.
about things, so I won't talk about it. But I will talk about what I'm reading,
Okay.
which
Oh, that was another question we had. That's great.
yeah,
That's great.
yeah. I my favorite writer of all time is Alice Munro, who passed away very recently.
Canadian. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I I think she was the writer who made it possible for me to write about my people and my community, which is so strange because she is completely removed from, you know, the part of the world that I'm from. But the ways in which she talks about ordinary people, especially from rural places, and the ways in which she talks about them with such care, but also with like a kind of sharpness. Um, that is when I was reading The Lives of Girls and Women, which I think is her second collection, and I think it was initially um, marketed as a novel, but it's really a collection of interlinked stories. Um, I thought, wow, I want to do that. I want to do that, but for Chinese people. I want to do that for Chinese people from Fuzhou, and I want to do that for um, these places that I care about. And so, like, what I'm doing right now, and for the next book, prepping for the next book, is I'm rereading all of her books chronologically, um, and having a lot of fun.
Oh, nice. So at the beginning of this program, you were introducing the characters and you started to introduce them as kids, and you sort of caught yourself, and you changed it to gay men. Would you say that it is fair to refer to them as kids? Like, although they were legally adults, they were very young, they were very inexperienced. You know, they were from these rural towns, provinces.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's I would refer to them as adults because like the book did, aside from an early chapter of the book where you see Old Second as like a young teenager, most of the book takes place when they're in their 20s in one section, and then again when they're in their 40s and 50s and 60s. And so like I just would refer to them as adults, but they are very, I think because of the fact that they lived in um, such repression, their experience with romantic love feels a little bit underdeveloped. I don't want to say childlike, but it's definitely underdeveloped. Because like I remember when I was a kid having not come out yet and being gay and like, you know, having a crush on a boy in class and like, you know, going home at night and saying to myself, almost with a religious fervor, I will not do that again tomorrow. I will not be this person tomorrow. But there are characters in my book who are doing that in their 20s and in their 40s. And so there is a kind of underdevelopedness there.
Wow. There's so much. And I mean, I have to say, I'm going to just take a moment and just say like how much we appreciate you
Yeah.
being with us and talking to us with such frankness. You know, it's a really wonderful
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you.
One of the things that Tiana and I were talking about this book was the descriptions and how you capture, I was going to say sights and sounds, and I'm stopping myself because that's just like a trope, and it doesn't give the texture that I'm trying to get at. But you talk about like in New York, the brown, like there's several different scenes I think where one of the characters is reflecting on the color that they're seeing or the absence of color that they're seeing. And again, this very that made it very real, right? Like these details. And so again, I know we talked about Google Maps, but how again as a writer, like how did you have to sort of go back and draw, add these kind of details, or as the story was coming, did it sort of come out with this full vision?
It came out sort of naturally to me because a lot of the places in which my characters live in America are true to life to where I lived when I was a kid. And these places are cramped and, you know, very dirty. And I don't know, like I would like the word squalor would describe these places. And but the characters in my book would try their hardest to dress up the squalor. They would, you know, go to the dollar store and get like plastic flowers to put in vases over the plastic table, which they would cover with, you know, $1 a yard tablecloth or whatever amount of money it would cost. They would get calendars from the grocery store. If you purchased a specific amount of groceries, they'll give you a calendar for free, and they would use that to cover up the mold or the water damage. And that was I just remembered being a kid and watching my mom try to decorate the places that we lived, these places that were so cramped, that were so dirty, and that she probably wanted to hide that from me. She wanted to hide the fact that these places were not ideal places to live, and so she would decorate them. And all I saw was her creativity, and all I saw was, you know, her eye for color, and it just translated into the book because I recognized it in her, and so I try to keep it so true to life.
So Kyle and I have gushed about how beautiful this book is, how beautifully written, how great the characters are. Was there a moment while you were writing where you were like, I did that. Like, this is going to be an amazing novel. Like, what was that realization like for you, if you had one?
I don't know, because it's so strange to write a book, because there would be that, but there would also be moments of like, oh my God, what is this? Like, there would literally be moments of like me writing the book within like the first 10,000 words and being like, I'm gonna sell this. But then like I had to take a break around the 15,000 word mark because I could not go any further. I had to take a break because I everything that I wrote at that point was terrible. And so there was a mixture of delusion of like, this feels wonderful, that would quickly be undercut by self-doubt. And so, yeah, it's a mix.
Wow. Wow. Well, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation, and we are coming to that stage of the evening, unfortunately, when we have to wrap it up. But I do want to take a couple minutes, and I did put a link in the chat just now to Jiaming's favorite independent bookstore, which is youandmebooks. Which you can find. It's You and Me Books, but you can find it at youandmebooks.com, which is you and me. So if you are looking to own your own copy of the book, you can go to your favorite independent bookstore. But if you're not sure where you might want to purchase it from, there's a suggestion here. And you can also, hopefully your local library has it. And if they don't have it, you can request it from your local library. Because one of the best ways to support our guests and writers in general, of course, is to read the books. And this book really is really good. Is really, really good. And we read a lot of books. So this is not a review show, but it is right now. It's really, really good. So, I do want to also, for people watching at home, thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight. Of course, you are why we do what we do, and we really appreciate you joining us. I did put a link to Jiaming Tang's website in the chat as well. And let me just try, and I'm going to pull it up on the screen for you again, for those who can't see it in the chat. And so we also hope that you visit him and see his work on the web. Please visit our library partners. We are the Office of Human Rights, but we are bringing this to you in partnership with the library system. So please visit them at pgcmls.info and see what they have coming up. They've got lots of great programs, as do we, in partnership with them. Next week, we are welcoming Allison Bettini Davis on her beautiful poetry collection, Line Study of a Motel Clerk, as a Jewish American Heritage event. And the following day, we're having Katrina Bird, who's an ALS advocate, wonderful woman from Mississippi, just a writer and an incredible powerhouse. And she is coming to talk to us for ALS Awareness Month. So we hope that you join us next week for those things. Jiaming Tang, it has been a complete pleasure. You have made Tiana's and I last week, as we've been reading this book and talking about this book, and tonight, just an absolute delight. So thank you so much for your time. We
Thank
really
you for having me.
Right.
Thank you. It's been such an honor. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.